does it work? The story of Stephen Hawking.
The crowd roared their approval. Cheers filled the air as his wheelchair propelled him across the stage. There he stood, basking in their chorus. The official leaned over him and presented the Copley Medal, and Stephen wanted very much to accept it. Of course, Stephen couldn't take it because he couldn't move his hands. So his caregiver reached over and placed it on Stephen's lap. There it glistened under the stage lights. It read, "The 2006 Copley Medal, awarded to Stephen Hawking for his outstanding contribution to British science." He was a master of his profession. How was it possible that he was here on stage, unable to move, but receiving Britain's highest scientific award? Stephen was born in 1942, exactly 500 years after the famous physicist Galileo died. He was a curious child. From the beginning, he was interested in how things worked. Stephen couldn't look at a machine without wondering what was inside it. Why are things the way they are? Stephen wondered. He wanted to know how a toy train worked and where the universe ended. That's why he was interested in mathematics, physics, chemistry, and all the sciences. He enjoyed building things, and when his father built Stephen's sister a doll's house, Stephen put in plumbing and lighting for it. Stephen naturally became interested in physics, which is the study of matter and energy in the world around us. Physicists study both the largest things and the smallest things in the universe. They study suns and planets and the space around them. Distant space tells us a great deal about how things work. Physicists also study tiny particles called atoms and particles even smaller than atoms. These are so small they're not always visible under a microscope. Whether it's the largest thing and the smallest thing, or everything in between, physicists are certainly curious. Stephen's curiosity drove him to become a student at Oxford University in the early 1960s. He wanted to accomplish great things. When Stephen was at Oxford University, strange things started happening. He fell over a few times for no reason. Then one day, he fell down the stairs. It must have been terrifying. One moment he was at the top of the stairs. A second later, he'd lost all control of his body. It was as if he'd become suddenly paralyzed. He tried to grab the banister, but it was no use. Down the stairs he fell, smacking and cracking all the way down. Somewhere he lost consciousness. When Stephen awoke, he had no idea who he was. That was probably one of the most frightening things of all. Something was seriously wrong with Stephen. It must have been difficult to admit. So Stephen hid it from everyone, but eventually the signs were too hard to hide. His parents took him to see a doctor, and Stephen ended up in a hospital. The hospital was cold, as they usually are. It was filled with the usual medical equipment, and that at least sparked his curiosity. How did it all work? The doctors gave him all kinds of tests. They must have wanted to know how Stephen worked. As Stephen lay in his bed, one of the doctors turned to him and said,
Stephen, I've some bad news, I'm afraid. You've got a disease called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Your muscles will slowly stop working. You'll live for another 2 or 3 years, but that's it, I'm afraid.
Not the sort of thing anyone wants to hear. Not ever. After Stephen left the hospital, he felt like a character in a tragedy. The one thing that made a difference was falling in love with a girl named Jane. They went punting on the river together. They talked and joked, and they agreed that they would challenge Stephen's illness together. Jane seemed undaunted, so brave. It's no wonder he fell in love with her. Stephen and Jane became engaged and later married, and she was the very thing Stephen needed to motivate him. Jane had a wonderful attitude. She gave him strength when he had none. She supported him when he needed it. She was the rock on which Stephen rested. However, since Stephen was now married, he needed to get a job and earn an income. To get a job, he needed to work toward a PhD, an advanced higher educational degree. So Jane was the motivation he needed to keep going. For the first time in his life, he began to work really hard, and Stephen discovered that he liked it. Stephen became interested in the beginning of the universe. The first question was simple. Did the universe have a beginning or not? One of the exciting theories was that the universe began with a great explosion. After the explosion, the universe began expanding. Slowly, over many years, it formed stars and planets, and it formed our Earth and Moon. Eventually, it expanded into the place we know today. In fact, it is still expanding. This is called the Big Bang Theory. Many scientists didn't like this idea. They asked,
What existed before the Big Bang? How does the universe come from nothing?
Stephen looked at the theory of the Big Bang and at the same time studied black holes. A black hole is a place in space where a star or sun has collapsed so that it is very, very small. There is a lot of matter in a very small space. This black hole sucks everything into it, even light. You can imagine it like the drain in a sink, which sucks all the water down into it. Without light, it's black. Using black holes, Stephen showed that the Big Bang Theory made sense. It's complicated to explain, but he was able to illustrate that the Big Bang was the start of everything. The planets, the suns, the universe itself. It was even the start of time. Nothing existed before it. Now, as Stephen sat on stage in front of the audience, he reflected on his accomplishments. Even when he was faced with the most difficult physical challenges, he kept on. The universe was too fascinating for Stephen to stop his work. Stephen was unable to speak with his own voice, so he used a computer to speak for him. He could barely move, so he relied on others for many day-to-day tasks. But he continued on regardless. Stephen's mind was sharp. He wanted to know how everything works. Don't you?
Discuss.
What can we infer about Jane's support for Stephen? Draw conclusions about their relationship. Use quotes from the text to describe the effect this relationship had on his scientific research.